I always figured college would be an escape from the boring routines of high school, a place of freedom, new friends, and long nights spent debating theories over bad coffee. But I never expected that my college experience would turn into a nightmare, one that bothers me to this day. What I thought was going to be a typical freshman year quickly became a bad trip, all because of my weird roommate, Elias. Everything started out innocently enough, as these stories always do. Elias moved in about 2 weeks after the semester began. He was tall, pale, thin, and had this aloof, detached air about him that immediately set him apart from everyone else in our dorm. Most people went out of their way to avoid him. His white skin and deep-set eyes, which never seemed to blink enough, only added to his creepy appearance. But I ignored the warning bells that should have been ringing in my head. Like a good roomie, the first night he moved in, I offered to help him unpack. He had barely brought anything with him, a few worn-out books, some clothes, and an old wooden box that he kept locked always. I asked him about it once, but he just shrugged and muttered, "Nothing you'd be interested in." His voice had this flat, monotonous quality, like he was reciting lines from a script rather than speaking to me. It gave me chills, but again, I ignored it. I told myself I was being stupid. It wasn't long before I realized Elias wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. His behavior grew more and more weird as the weeks went on. Like this, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of his babbling. He'd be sitting on his bed, whispering in some language I didn't recognize, his back turned to me. At first, I thought he was talking in his sleep, but then I noticed his eyes. They would be wide open, staring at the wall like he was in a frickin' trance. Then, no lie, the air in the room would grow thick, like something was pressing down on my chest. It made it hard to breathe. I'd lie there, frozen, unable to tear my gaze away from him. I was so scared he was going to catch me looking at him like I caught him or something. Eventually, his babbling would stop, and he'd lay back down as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I'd ask him about it, and he'd smile, this small, weird smile, and say something like, "No, you must have been dreaming." Dreaming. LOL. That's what I told myself too, even though I knew better. One night, though, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had stayed up late, drinking Red Bulls cramming for an exam the next day, when I noticed Elias wasn't in the room. It was way past midnight, and the campus was usually pretty silent by then. The shadows outside the window seemed darker than usual, shifting in ways that made my skin crawl. I tried to focus on my notes, but my sense of something being wrong kept growing. I checked my phone, 1:47 a.m., and wondered where he could have gone. Elias never left the room, especially not at night. I was about to quit studying and try and go to bed when the door slowly creaked open. Elias slipped inside, quiet as a shadow. But something was different about him. His normally pale white skin had an odd shine to it, almost like he'd been sweating, but the room was cold, freezing cold. He didn't look at me. He just walked straight to his bed and sat right down. I watched him from my desk, my heart pounding in my chest. He didn't move for a long time, just stared straight ahead. Then, without warning, he started humming. It was low at first, almost too quiet to hear, but it grew louder, filling the room with this eerie, creepy melody that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Like I wanted to say something, to ask him what the hell he was doing, but the words got stuck in my throat. Then I could see his hands trembling as he rocked back and forth, his humming growing more and more spastic. And then, just as suddenly as it started, he stopped. The deep silence that followed was worse. Elias turned his head slowly, like out of The Exorcist, and locked his beady-ass eyes on mine. There was something way wrong with his ugly face. His expression was too blank, too hollow. His eyes, they were way darker than I remembered, almost pitch black, like bottomless pits. "I didn't mean to wake you up," he said, his voice low and slow. I couldn't say anything. My mouth felt like it had been glued shut or something. "You should go to sleep," he added, lying down and turning his back to me. "You'll feel better in the morning." Hell, I didn't sleep worth shit that night. How could I? The next morning, I noticed something strange on his side of the room. On the floor beneath his bed was a bunch of small scratches, like something had been clawing at the wood. I bent down to get a closer look, but as I reached out, I heard Elias's voice right behind me. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." I jumped back, freaked out. He was standing in the doorway watching me with those demon eyes. There was no friend in his expression, no hint of the chill roommate I thought I knew. I mumbled an excuse and grabbed my backpack, eager to get the hell out of the room. For the next few days, I tried to avoid him as much as possible. But this tension between us kept growing. I started hearing more weird noises at night, like scratching, shuffling, and whispers in that same strange ass language. It felt like even the walls were alive or something, listening and watching me. Then finally came the night everything changed. I woke up to a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. At first I thought I was having a nightmare, but when I opened my eyes I saw Elias standing over me. His face was inches away from mine, and his hands, those trembling, creepy, bony hands, were pushing on my shoulders. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and he was staring right through me. "Let it in," he whispered. "It's waiting." I wanted to push him off, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like a vase paralyzed. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only stare up at him in horror as his grip tightened, his nails digging into my skin. I don't know exactly how long I was trapped like that, stuck underneath him, but it felt like forever. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, Elias backed away, his face blank like normal again. He didn't say a damn word. He just climbed back into bed like nothing happened and pulled the covers up over his head. I was over it. I bailed the dorm that night. I packed my shit and stayed with a buddy on the other side of the campus for the rest of the semester. When I went back to collect the rest of my things a few weeks later, Elias was gone. The room was empty, but the scratches on the floor were still there, like a bad reminder of the nights I spent there with him. Since those days, I've tried to forget about him, about all the things I saw and heard. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear his damn voice. That low, babbling talk of his that never totally leaves my mind. People don't believe me when I tell them this story. They say I'm exaggerating, or that I probably let my imagination get to me. But fuck them. I know the truth. Elias was not just another college student. He brought something to our room with him, something evil, something that probably is still out in the night somewhere. Who knows? But I swear sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment, I feel like something is watching me and waiting, just like Elias said. I'll never forget that year, and I'll never stop wondering what was in that old wooden box. But some things, I guess, are better left unknown.